Nellie Longarms. Written and read by Jade Zhao. This story was first published in Chthonic Matter, a dark fiction quarterly, in their fall 2025 edition, edited by C.M. Muller. Auntie Gwen died at the age of 97. She'd been living alone for 20 years by that point, and though the news of her passing hardly came as a surprise, it was still sad. I hadn't seen her since Uncle Roy's funeral, and she'd seemed frail, even then. Crooked. Fluttery, like a butterfly. I don't think she liked seeing me. She never looked me in the eye and wouldn't address me directly. I shouldn't have gone, really, but it had felt like the right thing to do at the time. I desperately wanted her to know that I still felt guilty, every single day. But that wasn't the sort of thing you could just come out with. I had been in charge, after all. What had happened on my watch. When my mother had called, I'd known straight away somebody was dead. We didn't talk otherwise. She said it would be a small funeral, and that there was really no need for me to come down. I agreed and thought that would be the end of things. But then, about a week later, she rang again. I have a favour to ask, she said. Her voice was warbly and thin, with that hesitant, rasping quality that very old age brings. She'll be next, I thought to myself, and then felt guilty about that too. Will you go to her house and do a bit of sorting for me? I would go, but... She trailed off. Of course she would go, but she was confined to her chair nowadays, so that was never going to happen. It was all on me. How could I, her only son, refuse? Yes, of course, I said. You don't mind, do you? No, not at all. Neither of us mentioned what we were both thinking, and once the logistics had been ironed out, the conversation was over. My mother and I had never been close. Or perhaps once we had, but not since the incident. A curtain had fallen between us since then, never to be lifted. The next day I set off to fulfil my obligation. Winding down narrow country roads, I passed picturesque villages and quaint little tea rooms before reaching more remote places, getting deeper into the back of beyond. Rolling hills and thick pockets of trees obscured me from the modern world, and by the time I drew near to my destination, darkness was falling. It was bizarre to be back after more than half a century, and despite all the time that had passed, I was acutely aware of my proximity to the accursed spot. It lay just beyond the field to my right. I kept driving without looking in its direction and ignored it. Before long I arrived and pulled my car up in the gravel drive. Auntie Gwen had never wanted me back as a guest, and I couldn't blame her. It felt wrong to be in her space, but it couldn't be helped. The house might have been beautiful under different circumstances, luxuriant in ivy and moss. As a child, I called it the witch's cottage, no aspersion on my aunt, you understand, but due to its irregular medieval architecture. I switched off my car's engine and was immediately engulfed in silence. There was no noise whatsoever, and I made an effort to close the door as quietly as possible, for fear of disturbing something. Despite being out in the country where the air was fresh and clear, I felt as though I couldn't get a good breath. The atmosphere was thick and soupy, oppressive. There are eyes on me, I thought, then tried not to think. I grabbed my overnight bag from the boot and, as I'd been instructed, headed to a big conspicuous plant pot on the path that led to the front door. Underneath it lay an old-fashioned iron key, slimy and cold to the touch. I picked it up with a shiver and gave it a quick wipe on my jacket before approaching the front door and inserting it into the lock. It turned with a hearty screech, and I was in. Inside, the cottage was exactly as I'd remembered it, only smaller. Gwen had certainly been a bit of a hoarder, it seemed. Each crooked wall displayed an array of pictures and knickknacks, giving off a smell of dust and something slightly sweet, like hay. The ceilings were low and made lower by the assortment of ancient beams that crisscrossed this way and that to support the structure. Every room seemed to have its own frightening irregularity. Following the narrow, uneven steps up to the squat first floor, I went around switching all the lights on, illuminating the house for my own peace of mind. Except for Kathy's room. I didn't go in there. In the kitchen, there were still some plates left in the sink, with a glob of festering blackcurrant jam attracting a crowd of fruit flies. I started to worry that sorting everything out might take longer than I'd expected. I would just do the superficial stuff, I decided. Take any important documents, do a bit of cleaning, box up the small bits. I could hire someone to do the rest. It would all be okay. I boiled the kettle and made myself a cup of tea, then went and stretched out in the living room, aching from the long drive. On the mantelpiece sat a large framed photograph of Kathy, grinning up at the camera. It had faded over the years, sun-bleached to a pinkish hue, showing her at 8 years old. It couldn't have been taken long before the incident. I remembered the dress she was wearing, which in reality had been a green gingham. She sat in the grass, beaming, eyes scrunched narrow and a smile revealing a mishmash of baby and missing teeth. She looked a skinny little thing. It was hard to believe she'd be nearing 60 now. It was a stiflingly hot summer that year, and we had made the long drive down to visit my Auntie Gwen and Uncle Roy. I remember that my parents and I were going to stay with them for 3 nights, and I was excited because they lived in the countryside, and I would get to go gallivanting about with my cousin. Kathy was 2 years younger than me, not to mention a girl, but I didn't hold these things against her. We got on well, actually. Together we stood on the threshold between the cottage and the fields beyond, dying to be away on an adventure and to feel the hot sun on our cheeks. Our parents sat at a round table in the kitchen, telling us what not to do and warning us to be back in time for tea. We nodded, willing them to hurry up and finish their speeches, and then we were away. All morning and all afternoon we spent playing and talking and running about the trees and fields, not seeing another soul, enjoying our own private playground. The smell of flowers and grass made my nose and eyes itch. I didn't care. We must have run for miles, circling back this way and that. At some point I took off in a new direction, but before I could get far, Kathy reached out and grabbed my arm. "Oh, don't go through there," she said, a dark cloud seeming to come across her face. "Why not?" I asked. "That's where Nellie Longarms lives. My mum says we aren't allowed to go there." "Who's Nellie Longarms?" Kathy scratched at her arm nervously and looked around as though someone might hear us. "She's a lady who lives in the lake. She's always lived there." "What do you mean, always? Who is she?" "I don't know, but Mum says we aren't allowed to go." "Rubbish," I said, full of the bravado that comes with being 2 years older and wiser. "Nellie Longarms drags children down and drowns them if they get close," Kathy whispered. I scoffed. "I'm going to have a look. I'm not bothered about any Nellie Longarms. She can try to come and get me." I trudged off on my chosen path. Kathy hung back. I stopped and turned. "Are you scared? Are you going to run back and tell on me like a baby?" Well, that was that. I'd said the magic word. If there was one thing that Kathy didn't want, it was for me to think she was a baby. That was a fate worse than drowning. "No, I am not," Kathy shouted and stomped her foot. She pushed past me and I followed her. We walked through a clearing and scrambled down a shaded hill, underneath a canopy of tall trees that blocked out the sunlight. I shivered as the temperature dropped and my sweat began to cool. We came to the bottom where the land levelled out, and found ourselves in a basin, the majority of which was covered in a large reservoir. My mouth watered at the possibilities. I couldn't believe Kathy had hidden this from me, and on a boiling hot day like this. The water, cold and deep, looking like black glass, stretched perhaps 200 or 300 metres from end to end, with an old stone pump house on the opposing shore. It was a gift as far as I was concerned. "That's a little grebe," Kathy muttered in an absent tone, chewing her lip and pointing at a bird nestled by the water's edge. She looked up at me, her eyes wide, her expression more serious than I'd ever seen it. "Don't go." "You don't believe it, do you?" I said. Nellie Longarms is just a story to keep you from swimming. They're worried you'll get tired and not be able to get yourself out, so they make up a scary story to stop you from coming here alone. Kathy looked embarrassed and didn't reply. Let's just walk around the edge, I suggested. Reluctantly, she followed me, and we began to trace our way around the reservoir. I picked up a smooth, flat stone from the ground and skimmed it along the top of the water. We watched it bounce right out into the middle before it plopped out of view. Kathy bent to choose a pebble of her own, ready to copy me. She was about to send it flying when she paused. Something had moved near the pump house and caught our eyes. Something black that smoothly darted out of sight. Had it been a trick of the light? Another little grebe? The sun was shining hard and its rays glistened on the water, making it gleam and flash. We both squinted. Is someone there? I asked. Please, whined Kathy, tugging at my sleeve. Don't go. Don't be stupid, we've as much right as they have. Was there definitely someone there? Maybe it was seeing how scared Kathy was that made me want to stay. It gave me a thrill. Like I was the grown-up, the brave one. Hello, I shouted. Stop it, Kathy hissed. I looked at Kathy and smiled menacingly. I took one step towards the pump house. Don't, she squeaked. I took another, grinning like an idiot. Tears welled in her eyes. I was so cruel. I started marching towards the pump house. I stopped at about 100 feet away. Suddenly, despite the heat, I became very cold. The sun moved behind a cloud, throwing a grey cast over the scene. Everything moved slowly for a moment, and a feeling of pure dread washed over me. I think Kathy must have experienced the same feeling because I remember she whimpered. Then I heard footsteps behind me, and I turned to see her running back where we'd come from, leaving me alone. I couldn't move. I was frozen. Looking to the pump house, I noticed a piece of clothing poking out from behind its stone wall, flapping in the breeze. Then I couldn't hear the birds or the lapping water or the sheep in the distance. Not even Kathy's pounding feet. A woman stepped from behind the pump house. The shock of it jolted me like electricity. As my eyes met hers, I knew I was screaming. My mouth opened so wide that my jaw ached, but no sound came out. The woman moved forward. Her chin was tucked tight into her chest, and she stared at me from underneath her eyebrows with enormous grey jelly eyes. She wasn't steady. Her head twitched back and forth, rocking spasmodically. Her mouth was wet, black and cavernous, and she was making a weird noise like a dog growl. She was tall, too tall, 9 or 10 feet, and with the longest arms I had ever seen, out of proportion with even her freakish, spindly frame. She reached out to me, dripping, sodden wet with icy lake water. A hand landed hard on the back of my shoulder. "Come on!" Kathy yelled. She pulled me backwards, almost off my feet, and we both began to run. My legs and calves burned as I ran faster than I ever had in my life. But Nellie Longarms was faster. It all happened with frightening speed. She grabbed Kathy. I never stopped running, just turned and looked over my shoulder as Kathy was silently dragged beneath the water. We looked at each other a final time, and I saw the betrayal and fear in her eyes. Then, in an instant, I was alone. She vanished into the murky blackness. I hadn't helped, hadn't even tried. My younger cousin had come back and rescued me, and I'd left her to die. I remembered the days and weeks that followed in fragments. I didn't remember walking back to the cottage, but I remembered Auntie Gwen's animal scream when they'd pulled Kathy from the reservoir, the grey flesh of Kathy's face, and her clouded, unseeing eyes. I didn't remember where we'd slept that night, but I remembered the funeral. I never forgot Nellie Longarms. Not that I'd told anyone at the time about her. I'd said Kathy had fallen in and couldn't swim back out. I knew nobody would believe me if I told the truth, and after a while, as I grew up, I didn't know if I believed myself. Of course I couldn't have seen her, I reasoned. Nellie Longarms wasn't real. I must have made it up in my traumatised state. I grabbed a blanket from the airing cupboard, set to spend the night on the couch, even though I was too old for such nonsense. My back couldn't take the punishment, but I couldn't find it in me to sleep in any of the beds. I settled down in the dark and closed my eyes. A canvas of cold stars glinted indifferently above me. I breathed in sharply and felt 1,000 icy needles jab into my ribs. Water? I thrashed in a panic, my head dipping under and rising again, vision blurred. I swallowed a mouthful and spluttered and hacked, so cold. Where was the shore? I turned and panicked, the water and the sky, the same unfathomable black. I couldn't see, didn't know which direction to go. Every muscle tensed and cramped, slipping under, something grabbing at my legs, a grey face below me, jelly eyes. I awoke with a start. For a moment I didn't know where I was. Then I realised I was standing at the open front door, right on the threshold. Stillness, silence apart from the cool breeze that swept inside. I closed the door and locked it, returning to the couch. I never sleepwalked. Very odd. I got up early the next day and went straight to sorting the house. All documents, potential valuables, and sentimental things for my mother went in one corner, and the rest I did my best to gather into boxes to be junked. Such a dutiful son. I hoped she'd at least be grateful, even if she couldn't muster anything else. I was working efficiently, and estimated if I could keep up the pace, I might need stay only one more night. This spurred me on. The house had an unpleasant, gloomy atmosphere, and I wanted to be gone. I found a notepad full of scribbles, some phone numbers, reminders for bills, and people who might visit. I was about to toss it when I flipped to a page with a drawing that made my blood run cold. My aunt had drawn a figure standing in a window. It was crude, childishly done, just the stick figure of a tall woman, with long hair, next to some other scribbles that didn't relate, but it put me in mind of the incident. At the edge of the page, in her wobbly cursive, she'd written down, "Don't come." My eyes flicked to the small leaded window in front of me, and I shook my head. I told myself not to get carried away and threw the notebook in the junk pile. At 11 a.m. I stopped for a mid-morning snack and a cup of tea. I was sweating in the heat and again paused to look out the window. Daydreaming, I thought of how good it would feel to be driving away. Then I saw her. My cup shattered as it hit the tiled floor, sending porcelain shards flying. She was standing right at the edge where the land dipped down below out of view, watching me. Green gingham. I saw her as one sees a mirage through a haze, doubting myself and yet with a terrible certainty. She was too far away to make out her features, but in my mind I imagined her open mouth and grey face, and standing next to her, someone tall and dripping wet. I should never have come here. As quickly as I'd seen them, they both blinked out of view. I went straight to the front door and clasped the handle, ready to run out and drive away. The car was close. It wouldn't take more than 40 seconds to run down the path to the drive, unlock it and climb in. But I paused. A faint dripping sound on the other side of the wood. I let go of the handle and took a step back. They were out there. I was sure of it. The idea of their clouded eyes falling on me was unbearable. I sneaked around and, without standing directly where I could be seen, drew all the curtains on the ground floor closed. In the dim light, I picked up Gwen's heavy rotary telephone and, not knowing what else to do, dialed my mother. It rang several times, and I imagined her groaning as, with difficulty, she pushed herself up from her chair and shuffled like a tortoise to answer. "Hello?" came her creaking voice. I took a deep breath before responding. "It's me," I said. "Yes?" I can't do it. I shouldn't have come. Can't do what? Is that David? She said. I'm at Auntie Gwen's. My voice cracked and hitched as I let out a sob. There was a long pause. What on earth are you doing there? My mother asked. She sounded annoyed. The pause was then mine. You told me to come and sort it out, I said. No, I didn't, she replied. I wouldn't have asked you. It wouldn't have seemed right, considering how Gwen... She searched for a way to phrase herself, trying to be diplomatic. Gwen made it clear you weren't welcome there after what happened. She didn't want you to ever go back to her house. You called me and told me you needed help organising her things, I insisted. I called you to let you know she died. That was it. Gwen would never let you come back. Not after what happened. Silence. My stomach turned over. Do you think you've made a mistake? She asked, in a strangely flat tone. Maybe you should go down to the reservoir. What? I said. Do you think you've made a mistake? Her voice began to change, the sound moving from that elderly rasp to something like a dog growl. Not words anymore. That wasn't my mother. I slammed the phone down, shaking. This was a nightmare. It couldn't possibly be happening, not after all this time and the life I had led. And yet here I was. My heart pounded in my chest and I leant against a wall to steady myself. Took some deep breaths. Clutched at my car keys. I would have to make the dash down the path and get out of here. There was no other option. I looked around, unable to focus, trying to keep my head straight, readying myself to run. There's no such thing as Nellie Longarms. There is no such thing as Nellie Longarms. There is no such thing as Nellie Longarms. At that moment, a trickle of black water ran underneath the gap of the front door, travelling between my feet. With it came 8 long, grey fingers. They twitched like the legs of a spider, and a dog's growl filled the room. I yelped and stepped away. Determined now to escape out the back, I turned before crumbling in terror. Petrified, I watched as water poured down the stairs in a steady stream, pooling at the bottom in a growing black puddle. Don't go, a tiny voice whispered in my ear.